I am worried. I'm worried as a former newspaper reporter who knows that democracy depends on informed people. I'm worried as someone who left journalism to study government to find out how we can make decisions together that will help more people. And I'm worried as someone who left that work behind me because I realized that changing laws doesn't always mean changing hearts, and who believes that we need sources of hope to hold us together and to offer that shelter that Maddie sang of so beautifully. I am worried. I'm worried because each day on the news this week, people aspiring to hold the highest office in our land are defending violence and mocking its victims. And at a time when we have more work than we can really understand to do to be sure that people have jobs and safe places to live and health care, what our politicians are doing is dividing the human family even further. So I'm worried. I'm especially worried because I know in my own life that when I am angry, when I am incensed, is not generally when I do my best thinking. And I'm worried because the debate around the future of our nation, whether it concerns our legislative or our judiciary branch, is increasingly angry, and it's not about considered decision-making or even respect for the Constitution of our nation. I'm worried because the debate all around us is simply a recitation of hatred and hurts and insults. I am worried. Anyone else out there worried too? Yes, yes. So this week, NPR aired this comment from 8th grader Samora Reed Bandel, who lives in the North Carolina town where my son Liam was born. Samora follows elections on social media and says that all the candidates' name-calling doesn't seem very presidential. I just feel as though it's really childish, he said, and I don't think grown adults should be acting like us. Another child in the story pointed out that shoving and attacking people was not, quote, good examples of bystanding, end quote. The children can see it, somehow not our leaders. So now I'm not worried, I'm scared. I'm scared. Because all week, this week, we also heard people from across the political spectrum calling for calm and civility, and we have also watched those cries go unheeded. And the Huffington Post reported a few days ago that Donald Trump supporters who have been mimicking SS salutes have now formed what they call the Lion Guard. And in their words, quote, the Lion Guard is a call to put the words "Make America Great Again" into action and aid Trump's security and show our adversaries that we are disciplined, perceptive, and watching, end quote. I'm scared because everything points to the fact that somehow we have let a small ball of hate start to roll down a very, very, very long hill, and now we are looking up and seeing it come right towards us, gaining mass and force and speed. So I'm worried, and I'm scared, but I'm also hopeful. Because I know that most people are good-hearted. And in our faith, in fact, we say that every person has the potential for that good-heartedness. And what we also say is that it's our responsibility to try to build the conditions by which people can prosper in our time, not in another life, in this world. And I am hopeful that we will. I believe that what we're waking up to in this nation is something that we thought was a joke, something we thought was just reality TV meets politics is actually now very sinister and threatening. We are scared of the ugly mask, and yet what is worse is the great face of discontent behind it, and the people who are feeling so disenfranchised, so powerless, that they no longer care what they destroy. And what we're learning is that this disenfranchisement is linked to economics, and that the lack of decency we are witnessing is linked to a lack of decent jobs which would allow people to live with dignity. We are learning that the people who are angry are also the young of all political stripes, who do not believe that government has anything to offer them, and who were raised up in a culture that says, buy and spend and numb yourself. We are realizing that we live in a world in which real wages, including those for college graduates, started to drop in the year 2000. And we're realizing that the seeds that were sowed by Ronald Reagan to discredit and unmoor government and our beliefs in it decades ago have been quietly and steadily growing into massive structures which rival the majesty of our beloved redwoods. The redwoods, by the way, are perishing with global warming, which is not an issue in this campaign because we're focused more on schoolboy taunts and diminishments. We have whole generations that have grown up hearing people all along that political spectrum trash talk our collective life. And what we are seeing in more and more areas of our lives is the tragedy of the commons. The tragedy of the commons. It's a term that was coined by biologist Garrett Hardin. And I'm going to read you the description from Economics for Dummies, because this is the text I probably would have understood better than the ones we used at Duke University when I first learned this. This is what Economics for Dummies says about the tragedy of the commons. The tragedy of the commons describes how shared resources are overused and eventually depleted. Hart compares shared resources to a common grazing pasture, like the one on the front of your order of service. In this scenario, everyone with rights to the pasture grazes as many animals as possible, acting in self-interest for the greatest short-term personal gain. Eventually, they use up all the grass in the pasture, the shared resource is depleted, and it's no longer useful. I think what this means is that when we let everyone graze their animals because no one tells them they cannot, eventually all our sheep have nothing to eat. Now I want to tell you I picked this sermon topic in August, and at the time that I picked it, my thought was to talk about the importance of our shared life. Because whether we are like John Muir, who in his encounters with the waterfall imagines preserving our parks and creating what becomes our National Park Service, or whether it is about our religious communities and the place where we gather to shelter one another in the world, we are seeing a decline in our understanding of the value of these places where we can imagine something larger together. Now, last week, as I began to work on this sermon in earnest, I added a subtitle to it, A Plea for Civic and Moral Decency, because the issue has become much, much more urgent. You see, the tragedy of the commons has met the anger of the people who feel as if they don't get respect. As one blogger put it, we are depriving the white working classes of their means to give. And as we export manufacturing jobs internationally and as we streamline labor with technology, we start to move people to the sidelines. It's not just that they have less money, it's that their identity as providers is being threatened. And this is why they're so often against welfare, because even if it would fix their financial situations, it would not fix their identity problem. It would hurt their dignity. And while the working class is undoubtedly worried about the economy, we already know that many will not vote in their economic best interests. They will vote for the candidate who promises a return to dignity. And it's not because they're dumb. It's because they care about their dignity more than they care about their finances. So here's the thing about the tragedy of the commons. It used to be this idea that applied to a small number of public spaces that we had among us. Those were the places where those tragedies occurred. A park like the ones Muir started, or a shared New England commons. We were a nation at one point which had the collective imagination to invest in public spaces of grace, like public libraries, public parks, and that great ladder to opportunity, high-quality public education, something which we have largely abandoned. Now, the people who would champion these things now, today, in our world, are considered politically naive. And national office no longer ranks in the aspirations of many young people who live in a world of anti-heroes, such as the Kardashians. You know, which is funny, but it's not, right? Yeah. So the tragedy of the commons is also occurring, of course, at our global scale, in our failure to attend to the very basic needs of our planet and its atmosphere, or to notice that we're having an impact and change before it's too late. And while sheep may have fewer places to graze, what is even more concerning is the number of people who have no country where they can be assured of safety. And in an entire universe of thought and belief, we are increasingly abandoning the idea that we need any common spaces at all. And we're replacing it with the idea that any true need can be bought with a credit card or numbed with a designer drug. The tragedy of the commons has become much, much more widespread than just simply that little patch of public land. The tragedy of the commons now is that we're beginning to lose and erode any sense of our need for one another, that we can be better together than we are alone, looking only at our own consumptive needs. You know, over the last couple months, we have been talking a great deal here about the decline of religious life in our nation and what it means for us. And I have begun to conclude that this is occurring not just because people have become less accepting of antiquated beliefs, which is what some of us like to think. I believe it is also happening because people no longer see any reason to suffer the discomfort of being part of community with all its gives and takes and inevitable irritations. Well, we can be worried, and we can be scared, and we can be hopeful. These last weeks in our nation say to me that we must also be aware. The ultimate question is what to do other than to watch and allow our own divisive anger to rise. I believe that if we come together, we have to find ways to remember that some things are more important than our own needs and wants, that some things are too precious to put a price tag on, that all people deserve a path to prosperity and to live a life free of basic want, and that we must learn to respect our greater environment upon which we all depend. We need to stop thinking so much about what we want and need as individuals and more about what we want and need as a society, as a community, and as a nation. Relentless and ever-expanding consumerism leaves us all grazing on a dirt field. You know, many of us are drowning in things, while some among us do not have even the most basic of needs: shelter, food, safe water, physical safety. We need to hear their voices and the voices of those just a few steps before them who know that only one paycheck or one decision could put them in that position. We need to listen to the cries for a livable wage. We need to heed the ever more urgent call to change our lifestyles as our planet warms, to stay aware and not turn a blind eye towards our political system because of its lack of civility and decency. Because that very lack of civility and decency is, in fact, a potential Trojan horse which could usher in a much, much more dangerous enemy. We need to gather, as we do now, in this community, and we need to be grateful to have a place where we can remember to hope. Hope is good. This is a time to act, to invest in those institutions which remind us what it means to be part of a larger whole, places like this church and the truth-saving and other life-saving organizations, and to invest our time and effort in support of our political system. Because as three-time presidential advisor Robert Reich notes, turn away from politics and you turn away from our government. This is not a time just to say, I belong to the right organizations that do good things. This is the time to do good things. If you are worried, if you are concerned, if you are angry, or if you are afraid of what is happening in our nation as I am, then let's just start figuring out how our hope joins that countervailing force of resistance. Let's get over our shock and start making change. Maybe we should register voters. Maybe we should get measures on the ballot, such as a minimum wage, which would be one step towards widening economic opportunity. Perhaps when they come to our state in a few months in droves, we should meet the hate mongers when they come into our communities and say, no, we stand on the side of love. Maybe we should be the counterforce of nonviolent resistance. Perhaps we will be brave enough to step up and say, no, the presidency is our commons. Those who have billions of sheep and yet no regard for human decency need not apply. Now, a couple things are already taking shape. They began to take shape in a number of conversations this week. In May, the Cisco network, of which we're a part, the Interfaith Council and the Racial Justice Coalition in this county, are going to have a candidate forum for all the county supervisor candidates in Contra Costa County. Because we want to demand that our leaders face the actual real needs of our county, and in which scores of people are without any kind of housing, where very ill and vulnerable people and young children are on the streets, where people are going hungry and without the mental health or substance abuse help they need, and where our leaders are still talking about building bigger prisons. And the ministers' Wednesday night class is going to be suspended for the rest of this month, so we can take up a new approach in April, which will focus on equipping us with the tools and analysis needed to be a force of resistance in the coming times. And anyone who wants to gather this week and begin to think about action steps, we're going to be here in the sanctuary at 7:30 after Vespers this Wednesday night. Because as Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who died resisting the Nazis in his time, said, one act of obedience is better than 100 sermons. I want to say that again. One act of obedience is better than 100 sermons. And I say that as a preacher. We need to take action where we can and not just agree with the words. We cannot afford to lose our world to the ever-ravenous sheep of unchecked consumerism or demagoguery, or to those who would follow sheep-like after an abusive power. We need to work to reclaim the commons for all, including the commons of decency, civility, and respect for our democracy, which, although flawed, is still the system under which I choose to live. We must not stand idly by while bigotry runs rampant and hate is spewed into our one and precious world. We need to take back the barren commons of hope and replant them again with our heirloom seeds of love and unity. We must stand up for a true liberty and decry false freedom, and we need to acknowledge our fear and then step out in courage together. In defense of our nation and of our democracy, may we be the ones who help to make it so.